Look, that's me when I was a young volunteer. This photo was taken on November 5th, 1967.
Look, we were so young, now we're old.
I was 23.
And you were so beautiful.
Not that pretty. Come on. You're exaggerating.
We sacrificed our youth.
But it's our pride and joy. You have to understand something, that even if you're only a grain of sand in society at large, in your youth, you contributed to the reunification of your country. And you can be proud of that.
At least you have this photo. We have nothing left.
You are much luckier than me. You have a child you can count on later. All I have is this photo.
Today they are almost 60 years old. They were not yet 20 when their lives dramatically changed. When they were drafted by the North Vietnamese government. When these young girls, most of whom came from peasant families, were told that they were the vanguard of their generation and should devote themselves body and soul to the war effort.
The war may last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or even longer. Hanoi, Haiphong, and many other cities may be destroyed. They may bomb our factories. But nothing is more precious than our liberty and independence. Until the day of liberation, our people will build a better and more beautiful country.
And so units of volunteers were mobilized, units without whom victory would have been impossible. 220,000 young people who were enrolled to serve the cause. 150,000 of them were young women, girls. But with peacetime, memories were soon erased.
We were childhood friends. When I signed up, Hong hadn't been recruited yet. My candidacy had been approved. But it bothered me all my life because she wanted to leave with me. I always thought she left because of me, without knowing where the war would take us.
Their purgatory lasted for 8 years, an incessant deluge of bombs, chemical weapons, and napalm. Their permanent and never-ending mission was to repair, consolidate, build and rebuild the 16,000-kilometer network of roads, paths, bridges and tunnels that made up the legendary Ho Chi Minh Trail.
I often think of all the difficulties I had to overcome during that period, and that all the others had to overcome too. Even though I am a woman, I wanted to work as hard as the men, so they wouldn't look down on me. And I think we were all motivated by the same feeling.
As a vital link between the North and the South, the trail was an obsession for both sides. An obsession for the National Liberation Forces of Uncle Ho to supply his troops. And an obsession for Uncle Sam's war machine, determined to destroy it. And so the women came to defend it, with picks and shovels and unshakable courage.
When we think of those times, we remember an experience that was particularly arduous. We were at the heart of the war, and after every bombing raid, we had to start rebuilding everything again. What we endured back then affected us deeply and still does today, because when we came back to our villages, we were no longer eligible for marriage. And so in terms of a family, we were less fortunate than the women who had never gone away.
The war was a cemetery for 1.5 million Vietnamese and for 58,000 American soldiers. The trail was a winding veil of pain and suffering that still afflicts the tens of thousands of volunteers. And peace was but an unworthy mother to the daughters who returned weakened, diseased, and wounded. Having sacrificed their youth for the cause, they did not know they would also sacrifice their womanhood.
You mustn't use insecticide at this time. You have to apply it in the afternoon.
The province of Tay Binh in the northeast of Vietnam. After 30 years of peace, the countryside here is still marked by the post-war fate reserved for the women who gave so much. Hoi dreamed of a decent job. She is a peasant. She dreamed of a family. She is still single. The sad fate of most of the women volunteers. The past, which should have promised honor and gratitude, merely haunts and pursues them, the weight of war or of tradition.
I left in 1965 and returned in 1971. At first I thought it was hard, difficult to take. But as time went on, with our training and with the encouragement of my friends, I got used to it. I got used to it and gradually came to think of such a life as normal.
At the time, I missed her a lot, and I was afraid for her. I was so frightened of losing my daughter. And when she came back, she was so ill and so disfigured that no one wanted to look at her.
The year I came back, I had malaria, and it lasted for years. It was only after I received treatment that I started to get better. I had lost my looks to the point where nobody wanted to see me. It was very depressing. I had feverish attacks several times a week. My skin was pale. I was like a ghost. When I returned, the men who had gone away to fight had not yet come back. They were still at the front. And girls like us, we had passed the age when we could hope to get married. We were neither old nor young, and that's why it was so hard.
How old were you?
I was 18 when I left and 24 when I came back. That's how it was. 24 was old. But then time passed, and I finally made the decision to have a child. The people around me, in view of the situation I was in, encouraged me to have a child. But I couldn't get used to the idea, because I'd always thought that a child should have a father. to spare him the humiliation and to make things easier for me too. But that just wasn't possible, and what I wanted didn't happen. So that's how I decided to have a child by myself, so that I would have someone to look after me when I get old.
Like so many others, Hoi was resigned to not getting married, but to remain childless would be to no longer exist. To realize her dream, in a certain manner she had to become a volunteer again, to find the strength to break a taboo and have a child out of wedlock, to wait for some compassionate man to help her. When did your daughter have a child?
A long time afterwards, several years later. She's had a hard life, but she gave me a grandson, and I was happy for her.
In the beginning, my mother was against it. She didn't agree. But I thought, without a child, what would I do later on? My mother considered the idea of adoption. The parish was against me too in that choice. And I'm being honest with you. The people were saying things about me that weren't very nice. But I got over that. I told myself I had to be strong and stick to my decision. Otherwise it would never work out. And from that point on, I thought about it a lot. And I finally made the decision to do it.
It obviously took a lot of courage to make such a decision. I understand. You mustn't feel sad about it. How do you feel today about having made that decision?
I've got used to it over time. But at the time, my superiors in the commune made me resign from my job. I was an accountant back then, and they made me quit. I felt deeply humiliated. Since then, my son has grown up, and I've managed to obtain the confidence of the people in the village. I have a role to play, even if it's only a modest one, that of a minor local manager. I work hard. I don't want the villagers to be able to reproach me for anything.
And then, silence. Hoi has already said a great deal. It is unthinkable to question her in greater detail, or to raise the subject of her child's father. Does her silence come from traditional Asian reticence or a feeling of guilt? One thing is certain, it respects a promise. To keep secret the identity of a man she spent just one night with, and who is often not far away.
Và thường là họ tìm những người đàn ông nào mà
The women often sought a man with whom they could have a child. A man in good health, intelligent, a man of good conduct. And they would approach him directly, saying they wanted to have his child. Or sometimes they would talk to the community women's group, or to a neighbour, if they wanted it known that they were hoping to have a baby. In such cases they would say, if a man agrees to have a child with me, if it is a boy, I will give them a quintal of rice, if it's a girl, a little less. But they weren't always immediately understood by the villagers when they declared their intention to have a child without being married.
Cái tặng ấy là nó ít hơn. Nhưng mà còn ở cộng đồng thì chưa phải là họ đã thông cảm ngay.
Bởi vì khi chúng tôi sinh con ra thì ai cũng thế thôi.
When we had our babies, we felt the same feelings as any other mother. We were glad, we were happy. Even if we knew that people around us were mocking us, it didn't matter. We didn't pay attention to it. We didn't dwell on it. And we thought that people wouldn't be scornful for long, that it would end at some point.
We both have our secrets, and the secrets we share, other people will never know about. They remain between us. We encourage each other and say all that we can do in this situation is to help each other. If we confide in other people, it might complicate things instead of making them easier for us.
Our past is the past. Now there are the children, and the only thing we regret is that they have no father. All through their lives, it will be written in their files that they only have a mother, and that's our only regret. But we have never regretted having these children.
And the children themselves? Most of them are familiar with the humiliation, the jibes, the dirty looks, particularly at school, but not all of them. Just like their mothers, though, they hesitate to talk about it.
There are quite a few in my class whose parents were volunteers. I tell my friends that during the war, my mother worked on the trail and that she was an accountant. My friends know very well what family situation I'm in, and they are kind to me. They treat me normally. They don't make fun of me.
All I hope for is that he works hard at school and passes his university entrance exams. Whatever difficulties we might have, I will do everything I can for him to succeed, because I realize he has less chance than the others. So that's why, even if it's expensive and I only have a small salary, I try my best to overcome all the difficulties because I want him to succeed. I have a lot of compassion for my son. I think he's been unfortunate compared to his friends. I don't know what he will become later, and that's something that weighs on me enormously.
In 1986, when marriage laws were modified, we observed that for one reason or another, women were unable to get married. And not just the former volunteers. That's why the article in the marriage laws that concerned the right to be a mother was changed, so that all women have the right to be a mother. It is clear that, since the modification, the law is more flexible, and that social pressures on the volunteers, as well as the social pressures on other women without husbands, well, they have been reduced.
Đối với những cái thanh niên phong và những người phụ nữ cũng đỡ hơn so với mà khi chưa có luật.
Until this law was introduced, bearing a child outside of wedlock could lead to being a social outcast and being rejected by the community. Left to fend for themselves in a country that had been bled dry, the volunteers had no one to support them for over 20 years, until mutual support actions were developed within committees of former volunteers, and certain people stood up to defend them. Like this man, who has never renounced the struggle to overcome oblivion. Mr. Ong spent 10 years in charge of a women's unit and has never forgotten the suffering they endured to defend the Chi Minh Trail.
The return was much more difficult for the women than for the men. Many of the women volunteers died. They gave up their lives on the trail. They really sacrificed themselves.
Even if blood has to flow, the trail will never be closed.
The women who lived in the jungle were very exposed to disease. They were infected with malaria more rapidly than the men. They also had specifically feminine illnesses. And then there were leeches and mosquitoes. It was a very hard life for the women. When they arrived on the trail, they all had very good skin. But when they returned home, they had lost their hair. Their lips were pale. Their eyes were empty. They were haggard. When they got home, many had no families left. When their parents died, they became the women with 5 nothings. They had no husband, no children, no home, no status, and no loved ones.
The thoughts of a man who has not forgotten that the post-war period did not bring him the same sense of solitude and abandon, that the trail provided him with a love story rather than depriving him. He appreciates the rare privilege of having found love during wartime without losing it, and of being able to make a home, particularly as relationships on the front were frowned upon.
We were luckier than other people because we came home unharmed, and our children have been successful to our great joy. But to be quite frank, I have to confess that when I gave birth to our first child, we looked to see if there were any malformations like a hair lip, and we had that reflex with each birth that followed. So we have really been very fortunate. So many of our former comrades have not been able to have families.
Some former volunteers are still without homes. Others were obliged to live in forests far away. When these comrades came home, we felt enormous compassion for them. There are around 200 such women in Tai Binh province alone. We've recently made very active appeals to the government because we would really like to have their status changed. It's very important. And many of them are now living in much better conditions than before. That's very important too.
A report made by the liaison committees and communist youth groups has recently stirred the government from its lethargy. The volunteer's status has only been acknowledged since 1997.
Dear comrades, concerning the question of status, we are continuing to make progress. Recently, the government adopted Article number 17, which will enable the remaining problems to be resolved. In the beginning, they didn't have the same status as the soldiers. The soldiers continue to receive their pay after demobilization, but not the volunteers. This was not previously written in any legal form. And so later on, we were able to solve many volunteers' problems by having their contribution to the liberation officially recognized. Their war contribution was as important as the soldiers. And through Directive 104, they have finally acquired the same status as the soldiers.
Đêm đã về khuya sương rơi ướt nao, tiếng em vẫn vọng núi rừng, mặc bom rơi pháo sáng mịt mùng, em vẫn mở đường để xe đi tới. Yêu biết bao cô gái vui ngày đêm mở đường, rừng trăm hoa thắm nở chẳng có hoa nào hồng. Em đi san rừng em đi bản núi, em như con suối nước chảy không ngừng.
Most of the volunteers came from the Tan Hoa province to the southeast of Hanoi. Being relatively close to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the province was of strategic importance. The Dragon Bridge in particular was crucial for moving vital equipment towards the front. After 4 years of hell in the center of the country, Van returned to her village, bringing with her, like all the others, the scars and after-effects of constant physical torment, malnutrition and disease, with war forever etched in her very being.
On that day, I'd gone to fetch some money to pay the unit's wages, and planes were dropping bombs. I didn't have the time to hide in a tunnel, so that's how I was wounded. I was wounded twice. I was hit in the lungs, and also my ribs were broken. 2 ribs. The wound went through my chest, and my breasts were hit too.
Aunt Van, have you got some crayons?
Yes. How much do you have? Before, I used to dream about having a family. I wanted the perfect family. A whole family. But after I was wounded, that changed everything.
Van opens a new and personal door to the secret garden of a femininity forever tainted and scarred. Some women have suffered from the shameful eyes of men. Van is one of many who have not felt worthy of admiration. She now dares to raise the veil that shrouds the identity of her child's father.
Some men have wanted to marry me. They have asked for my hand 2 or 3 times, and I have refused. I told them that I was handicapped and that I didn't want them to suffer from it, for them to put up with my handicap. I told myself that as long as I was young, it would be all right. But as I got older, it would get worse, and they would make humiliating remarks. And then later I thought, I'm not married, I have no family, I must have a child so that there's someone to look after me when I'm old.
Was that a difficult decision to make?
Yes, very difficult, extremely difficult. It wasn't an easy decision to take. I was afraid of having relationships with married men. I was afraid of how their wives would treat me if they found out. And that's why before the law was voted in, that I confess I wanted to have an abortion. I've never spoken about this before. Never. I'm telling you because you've asked me questions about my life, but I've never told anyone before. After I had my baby, I wanted to take care of him by myself. I wanted to raise him alone. I didn't want the man to give him anything whatsoever. And whether it was when I was pregnant, after the birth, or even today, he has never had to give anything towards my son's upbringing.
Ra đi. Anh ấy thôi nha. Này cô Hà Hồng có đi học không? Có học không đó hay là anh vẫn học ngoài kia rồi?
Xuân học khoảng 2.
Ăn cái bữa về là vào trong đấy.
Cô Long nhá.
Nha. Bà cô Long như nào?
Have you talked to your son about all this?
Không ạ.
No, never. But rumors go around. The villagers have told him certain things. He's never dared ask me any questions about it, and I've never spoken to him about it.
Do you intend to talk to him about it someday?
Maybe later, when he's an adult, when he's mature enough. But anyway, as people in the village have talked, he must be more or less aware of it. More or less aware of it.
I think it's a problem for our society. In terms of education, not having a father will have consequences on the children's behavior. And once in society, they will want to try and find their fathers and be recognized by them. It will be complicated for the fathers who are still alive and who have never come forward, particularly as many were married and had already had children beforehand.
Generally, the women decide to shoulder their burdens alone, with solitude and poverty often becoming unbearable. In both towns and the country, therefore, they often live under the same roof, sharing their hardship and isolation. Sometimes, when the former volunteers work in factories, such as here in this neighborhood of Hanoi, a state organization provides communal lodging.
We've been here for 13 years now, but all in all, we've been together for 40 years. 40 years. We were volunteers for 4 years. We had to build the road between Ten Hoa and Quan Binh. We were considered low-rank soldiers. We were paid pittance. When we were tired or sick, we were forced to eat to make us strong enough to fill in the bomb craters right after the bombing.
At the time, during the war, every month we had to go and look for food. And it wasn't like now, when you can go shopping nearby. Back then, we had to go 4 or 5 kilometers to get food, and the same distance to find something to make a fire. Those of us who were healthy used to help those who were sick or weaker.
We worked a lot at night, and we slept during the day. Whenever the bombs came, we were mobilized to go and repair the track.
We helped each other, encouraged one another. We really had close ties in life and in death. I had a boyfriend and then war broke out. That's how we were separated. I had this child in 1988. She's now in 10th grade. When she was 1 year old, I was in a very difficult financial situation. I was obliged to send her back to my native village. Having to do that made me very sad. I missed her a lot. But I was glad because she was with my family and she was then able to get a good schooling. And I could visit her from time to time.
Were you afraid of other people's reactions when you decided to have this child?
No, never. Here everyone encouraged me, saying if you want to have a baby, so much the better.
Of course, it's easier when you live in a community like that. We had more favorable conditions. At night, when the children were sick, we could always count on somebody helping us.
We help each other when we encounter difficulties, whatever they might be. If one of us has to go to hospital, for example, there's always someone there for support. Whenever someone was giving birth, there would be someone else around to do the cooking. They did their housework, washed their clothes. We've always provided support for each other, whatever the circumstances.
We live in a community for economic reasons. A woman who finds herself in the same family situation as me, but who has a house and no money problems, Of course, it is better for her to live alone. But if you don't have that good fortune and those resources, then you're better off in a community. Women who don't live in a community are rarely in such a delicate financial situation as we are. In general, if they make that choice, they are able to do so. It's difficult to foresee the future. I live from day to day. I have to look after my daughter, who is still at school. She was only in 7th grade when I stopped working, and I didn't have enough money to pay all the necessary expenses. Our living conditions were very hard. The people in the factory where I worked were very kind. They took care of us. They enabled me to continue working there part-time. It's thanks to them that I can make a living now.
Các anh ở bên đeo đi vào chỗ thầy.
Some have dared to face the taboos and achieve their dreams of motherhood. Others have found refuge in a very different vocation.
I knew that the Buddhist monk at the Pham Ksa had been a volunteer. But it was only during a recent discussion that I heard that you had been one too.
Oh, you know, there are many Buddhist monks who were volunteers.
Me too, like the Buddhist monk of Pham Ksa.
You volunteers lost a great deal.
It's true that we never thought we would become Buddhist monks. Among the former volunteers who are now Buddhist monks, I spent the longest time at the front. I left in 1965 and returned in 1972. The former volunteers who got married have rarely been able to give birth to normal children. Their children generally have some malformation or other. And then there are the women who were made sterile by the war. The ones who chose to live in a pagoda like me did it primarily out of vocation. But some also did it because they didn't have the strength to face normal life in society. That's why they chose to live in the shadow of Buddha. Being a Buddhist monk doing good for society has helped us and continues to help us find a certain moral serenity. And we've found our own form of happiness.
Đạo chân uy quan phổ chiêu lâm cộng tư minh gia hàm kiêu bạt vô thủy kim thân chư tội chướng lục căn tam nghiệp trung kiền viu nhất niệm viên quan tội tinh không chư Phật thiện toàn thân nam mô hương vân cai Bồ Tát Ma Tát nam mô hương vân cai Bồ Tát Ma
So how are you?
Khỏe lắm.
Last May, I returned to Route 20, where Unit 814 was stationed, at the junction with the trail. They've had a great stone monument built in memory of the volunteers. A great big monument.
Do you remember Tam, who lived in Vu Ninh and was in my unit? She got married, but she's sterile.
The one who lives in Wu Ninh.
In fact, it was Vu Chung where she lived. She and her husband have adopted a child. At first, they didn't want to tell their son. They wanted to wait until he was in his final year at school. But some malicious people in the village told him they weren't his real parents, that he was adopted. I shall tell you my secret. After sacrificing themselves for the revolution, many of our comrades encountered problems. I'm thinking of women friends like Tam, who got married but who couldn't have children. In reality, their marriage is more like a relationship between brother and sister. I think if I had remained in civilian life, the same thing would have happened to me. During the war, our health seriously declined, with the bombing, the injuries, and everything we went through. We lost what make us women. I'm a Buddhist monk now, because I too lost that part of my femininity.
Can you explain that?
During the war, I had malaria on several occasions, and I was wounded too. I was the victim of chemical products. I remember, it was at the station in Goi. I'm ashamed to tell you this, but when they transported me to hospital, I was half naked. Lang has had deformed children. Tam is sterile. They have been destroyed as women. I considered my own case, and that's why I took the decision I did. I became, according to the Buddhist term, Indong Nam. When a woman feels like a man, what good does it do her to stay in civilian life? That is why I became a Buddhist monk. But I have never spoken of this. I devote myself, above all else, to my vocation now. I don't talk about my personal secrets. What I have told you is our secret, the secret of the former women volunteers.